All right. Good morning. Happy Monday. Glenn, I'm super excited to have you here. My name is Aparna Ray, and I'm the host of this weekly LinkedIn Live called Data is Love, where we look at the intersection of data and everything else that drives our world towards greater diversity, equity, and inclusion. Glenn Block, welcome.
Thank you so much, Aparna. I am really excited. As you could tell by the texts I unloaded on you earlier this morning.
Also, want to say Ramadan Mubarak. I know that you've probably been up early getting ready for the day. And so I'm super grateful that you're taking some time in your day to come have this conversation with us.
Yes, Ramadan Kareem.
Okay, I met you, I feel like what feels like a million years ago, but we met like 4.5 years ago. And at that moment in time, you were working with, I would say, like really mainstream organizations, right? Like DocuSign, Microsoft, and you've spent a lot of years in product. But we
Right.
met at a moment in time, I think, when diversity, equity, and inclusion was really top of mind for you, and you were showing up to all of these spaces, right? I would be at events with you all over town. And so I'm just really curious, like, what for a tech product guy, what was the moment that made you say to yourself, hey, like I need to pay attention here?
Yeah. Well, so one thing many people don't know about me, and Ramadan Kareem. So that's a significant part of my journey. Is I converted to Islam when I was 19. And when I converted to Islam, it was a whole journey of reading books about Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad, and waking up to a lot of the realities of the way that Black people have been treated in this country. I think what I wasn't aware of in those days and where things change was the whole what systemic racism means. I mean, recently, after 20 years, I listened to the autobiography of Malcolm X after reading it, and I realized there was so much I just missed that is there. It's like all there, right in his writings. But I just wasn't ready to, understand that yet. A big turning point for me before you and I crossed paths was actually when Michael Brown was killed, and there were a bunch of different horrible cop shootings of Black men. And I actually had a friend, Michael Brown, at Microsoft. Actually, he wasn't at Microsoft at the time, who's a Black man. And I learned about the talk.
Mm.
The talk was a turning point for me when I realized, like, I don't know about the talk. Nobody ever had the talk with me. And I just don't have to worry about like how to act when police pull me over, because they're not going to pull me over. It's just not a
Mhm.
thing that I even have to think about. And I was this huge fan of the movie The Matrix. And I remember when I had this conversation with my friend, and when he explained to me that, like, as Black people, we always have this conversation with our kids. We teach them what to do because it's likely going to happen. And your response when that happens will determine whether or not you live. And I was just like, wow. Like, I really felt like that was like the red pill versus the blue pill. Like, I'm just living in this completely different world where I'm completely unaware of things. And I think even though I was became Muslim when I was 19, I remember early on in tech, often I'd be like, oh, everybody has the same opportunity, blah 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 blah. So yeah, so I think that was a pivotal point. Of course, Trayvon Martin, those were pivotal points that were telling me like something is wrong. And then actually, when I joined DocuSign, which is around the time when you and I crossed paths, DocuSign had a bold ERG program, which
Mhm.
was, focused brown and Black organizational leadership development. And they were having a big impact on even the messages of like when you onboard to DocuSign. And I was really taken by the things I heard about the importance of like equity and other things. And it had been budding in me, but the difference was coming. I had recently been at this startup, which I was an early employee and advisor at Auth0. And I was starting to get more and more aware of things, but I was not really at a place where I could, like, I was pushing, I was even in leadership, I was pushing for change to try to bring more equity in. We didn't have an ERG or anything like that. And I was just starting to become more knowledgeable of the experiences of Black and brown people. And but then I joined DocuSign, and it was like there was all this energy around it. And Charlotte Flanagan, who was leading an effort there, was also really
Mhm.
pushing for this. And I joined and got involved with the ERG, and it just kind of really got me thinking of like, okay, like I need to start doing more. This is, this I need to take the red pill, right? And really like understand what's going on and see what I can do. And then at the same
Mhm.
time, which is when how you and I crossed paths, there was like this almost like uprising of energy amongst Black women and women of color in tech in Seattle, which Future
Yeah.
for Us and you and Sage played a huge part in that, and having all these events. And I remember feeling at first like I have no business in being there. But then I was like, well, it's open, and this is a chance for me to try to like learn and challenge myself. And I remember going to a number of events where, often not being saviors or anything, but I was the only white guy in the room. And that was
Yeah.
a very interesting feeling, because it was like, should I be here? And but then I would hear these stories of women, and it was amazing. I really missed that at the Riveter. And
Mhm.
I met Minda Harts, and I just plug her. And her book The Memo had a deep impact on me. I definitely recommend it. And I was just telling Elizabeth Liba, who is another fantastic author, who has written this amazing book, I'm Not Yelling. Like, I was just telling her like 20 minutes, like 30 minutes ago, that about my journey and how I met, how sorry, how I got involved with this, and how much you played a part in that. Also, just plug for her book. Her book is excellent. Definitely read it. So yeah, I think it was just kind of organic, maybe being in the right place at the right time, and it was pre-COVID, and I had these awakenings that were happening in me, but I wasn't in the right environments to feed those. But DocuSign definitely lit a fire in me. And then when I got out there, then I just couldn't get enough of these events. And I started going to Black Women Talk Tech. And the other thing was learning to just listen. I am definitely a type A personality who historically has wanted to like jump in, and that actually I've learned as I've started to get on my anti-racist journey, that can be really horrible and cause so much harm. So I started to learn to just sit and listen, and learn to sit with uncomfortable things. Another
Mhm.
book that was a big part of my journey at that time was So You Want to Talk About Race, by
Yeah.
Ijoma Olu, that a coworker recommended. And that book required me to do the most sitting I had ever done. And I was just like, don't judge, just sit with it. Um, so yeah, that was, I do think that, my coming to Islam when I was 19, and Islam being a religion that looks at, that looks at the world and says that this is for everybody. It's not for a small group of people. And I met people from all around the world in mosques all around the world in the time that I was Muslim. So I think this idea of awareness and, learning to look at people as people and not judging them by the color of their skin, but then learning that like it's all well and good to say that, but you need to, in the same vein of looking and trying to like judge people with fairness, is the whole equity term. I never used the term equity honestly before, until I started going to events like your event and understanding the difference between equity and equality. And it's like all well and good to say that uh, you know, and I won't say don't see race, is
Mhm.
recognizing the beauty, of people from different places around the world and from different ethnic backgrounds and from different racial backgrounds. Of course, race is something that was made up in terms of the term, but we won't go there. But um, but also recognizing that everybody's experience is not the same, and that even though I may think I'm a good person, I may still be doing things because of growing up in a white supremacist society. I may be doing things that are treating people inequitably, and that everybody doesn't have the same fair shot. Anyway, that's a lot, but that's my story.
Yeah. And even I think, even the experience of being Muslim in different places in the world is so different.
It is.
It's so, so different. And like, I think about when I was growing up in the Middle East and this month, right? Like this month of Ramadan there was kind of like there was a universal pause. There was this kind of
Yes,
slowing down, and
sure.
like your school day would move up an hour and it
Businesses
would end
close
early.
early.
Businesses would close early, and there really is, such an incredible emphasis on community, including people who are not
Yeah.
Muslim, right?
Yes.
Into the breaking of the fast and enjoying meals together, and right, like prepping and planning. And it's very different, I think, than what people think. First of all, I think what people in the US think of Muslims,
Oh yeah.
right? But then also when I think of Ramadan, and the way people talk about it here is like, well, those people are going to go starve themselves for a month. And I'm like, gosh, like you really missed the point, because it really is
Yes.
about community.
Correct.
And you too would be welcome if you wanted to be a part of that learning, right? I wanna I wanna talk about your life, and I think your journey as a product guy. And
Yeah.
you've built a lot of really cool product organizations over the last, let's just say, a few decades. We're not gonna tell people how old you are.
25
And
years, 25 years in tech. So yeah, I've been around.
25 years in tech and still looking pretty young.
Thanks.
I
I don't mind sharing my age. As a matter of fact, my birthday was yesterday, so I am 51,
Welcome to the
which
next
is
decade.
shocking to me even.
I'm just curious, in this time, right, in the last 25 years, how have you thought about building product from an equity lens? And I ask this because I think it's relevant beyond tech. I mean, certainly in tech, we have a very few people building products that have an impact on billions of people, right? Literally billions of people. And so, yeah, I'm curious, like now, as you're building product organizations or supporting product organizations in your new role as the CEO of ProdSense, how are you thinking about equity? How are you thinking about the kinds of data that's
Yeah.
needed to address bias?
Yeah, so first off, and you know me, Aparna, so I don't try to sugarcoat things. I wish I could say that I've been thinking about this all the time in product, but that is not true. I would say it's only been even when I started off, doing a lot of the early, I would call it, self work, and trying to become more of an anti-racist, which I'm still on that journey. That's a journey that never ends. It's not a certificate. Um, but I didn't really think about what it meant yet in terms of, like, I think DocuSign is really the first organization where I really started to think about, like, hey, I'm working on a platform team. Like 99.9% of the people on the team are men. Like 95% are white men. Who gets promoted? Men, mostly white men. Like I saw this, and I knew a few women who were on the team, and I felt bad for them just sitting in a room. Like, and this is where, as you learn, it changes you. And like sitting in a room and watching a bunch of people get promoted that were like, not all were white men, but it was like no black men, and it was no women. I just did
Hmm.
not feel good about it. It was just like, I've changed. And I think DocuSign is the first place where I really started to get involved at the organizational level, trying to push on how we were doing things. Are we doing them in an inclusive way? So it's very new
Hmm.
for me. Um, and I also, at DocuSign, went back to school and got my executive MBA at Seattle University, which was a leadership executive MBA program. And so equity and justice and social justice was a big part of it. So those things definitely played in. And so with ProdSense, my new company, which is a fractional CPO company, and really right now is just me plus a partner, um, Denise Branch, who is a anti-racism educator, has written some amazing articles, and she and also Dr. Kimia Nuru Dennis are two Black women who have been a huge part of my journey as well around the same time that we met. Um, but ProdSense is really a fractional CPO company, chief product officer, helping early stage companies. And the other side to that is building product in an equitable way. So now I'm trying to really put my foot out there, put my foot down and say, I'm going to do something different here. At
Hmm.
Microsoft, where I went back to Microsoft a couple of years ago, and there, I got the chance to be involved in some large scale efforts at the Microsoft level across uh, Office 365, which is a huge organization where we were working on, how do we bring more equity the way we're doing things. So I got some training and practice there. But what I've seen is I break it down into two things from a product perspective. One is how you're building the product. Are the teams operating in a way that is inclusive? Are all voices heard, or are voices being shut down? Is there curiosity when somebody asks a question or raises a concern? Is it heard or is it shut down? Are people of color and particularly Black folks that are on the product team treated the same as others? And I've seen this. I've seen this when I was at DocuSign. I'll just call them out. I've seen women of color who were receiving unfair critiques of their code when they checked in their code. And
Yeah.
what powers me about this, what empowers me and fires me up on this are these are the things that many of the equity consultants out there don't see because they're approaching things from a very holistic way. But as you drill into any specific role, there are nuances that can play out significantly. So that's an example, I would say, of a process that's not really inclusive. And so I think that's one lens is like just how we build product, who is building the product? Like, are we looking at making sure there's good representation? And we know that more diverse teams build better products. I still have a hard time with using that as a justification because it just feels almost like unauthentic.
Hmm.
But it's a reality, and it often helps many business leaders to cross the line. So that's the one lens. The
So
second,
this is where the getting tactical is one area where I think you and I have often seen eye to eye, right? Like we can't be talking at the 30,000 foot level. What does it look like in your organization? What does it look like on your teams? What are
correct.
the behaviors, right? If the CEO is pushing to hire a bunch of women from Ada Developers Academy, that weren't little like baby nerds coding in the sixth grade. They're coming into tech as like as adults, right? Like this is a career pivot, and they're being treated really poorly by other developers. Then that woman being there is not adding value to the organization because all she's doing is firefighting.
Yeah, the gaslighting is horrible. That's another thing about the organization. I have a friend who's worked at a very big tech company. I won't mention her name for privacy, and she's a Black woman and who continually gets questioned about her credentials. She has like a
Hmm.
CS degree, but yet she'll get asked about, it's just, yeah, there a lot of that needs to change. There's because all those things, if that's the way you feel about a person, it's going to have so many uh, after effects in terms of
Mm-hmm.
building a product with that person on the team. You know,
Yeah.
what opportunities are they going to be given? Are they being promoted fairly? Like, there's all these things. So there's that vector, and I agree with you. I think that these efforts to try to, if we're really serious about becoming more equitable as companies, we do have to put the microscope on each different role and see like what is applicable and what are the nuances. Because if you just look at the broad sense and you miss those things, then they're going to keep, they're going to keep propagating the system. They're strong enough, as a matter of fact,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even stronger than the other ones, because this is directly affecting the day to day. The second lens is when we're building products, who are we targeting? What kind of data are we gathering to understand what is necessary in order to build an inclusive product? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where, I think like white people often assume like, oh, this will work for everybody, but we
Yeah.
know that's not the case. Or of course, gender, misogyny. A great example I think about recently was Amazon, right? Who killed this recruiting platform that they were developing because, like, close to the 0 hour, it turned out that that platform was completely biased in favor of white men. Surprise, surprise. Why did that
On the
happen?
basis of their names, right? Like it was on the basis of the
Yes,
names that have
names. Correct. They tested it by changing the names. Correct.
yeah.
Why did that happen? And this, going back to the theme of your show, which I'm so happy to be here, by the way, it's related to data, because these,
Mm-hmm.
it's either related, like, and now it's really becoming a hot topic with, and this was the case with this recruiting platform, with how AI is just exploding. Well, there is
Mm-hmm.
so much bias potential, and I'll go past potential. It's happening, packed into AI, which is beyond the algorithms, but it's about the data that you're training. Like, if you train it to only recognize like men's names, for example, then the AI machinery is going to have, the algorithms are going to have a preference toward men's names. But I think it's deeper than, I think AI is just one angle. Like, is this a product that's offensive, or that is, that has features that maybe make people uncomfortable, and you're not catering? And one that I'll give, which I think, and I come from a very technical background, but GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
GitHub used to name their brand. So GitHub is a place where developers put their code. And you have this concept of branches, which are different
Mm-hmm.
places that the code can be developed in different states. So you could have like a release branch and a development branch, etc. And the default branch for years, like since the beginning, which is like 30, 40 years, for Git, which is the underlying technology, was the master branch. And GitHub changed
Yeah.
this, and I
Yeah.
thought it was great. And there were a lot of people who were saying, well, it was performative. But here's the thing: like, the master branch has the whole master slave, I hate to use the term, concept, which is super prevalent in the software world. Is something that, white people never have to think about why that might be a problem. But yet there were lots of people that said, like, who don't look like me, that this really doesn't make me want to use this platform. And a bunch of, so that's just an example of where clearly at the time when Git was invented, this wasn't even something that was considered. um, you know you can say whatever you want, but going forward, that's a great example of where, think about the terms that you're using. But it goes deeper than that. But at the end of the day, I think it's about design. Designing for a more inclusive audience requires curiosity, questioning your assertions, intentionality to go out there and gather the different perspectives and actually learn, rather than push and promote your idea of what is correct. So
Yeah.
those are the two primary vectors I'm looking at with ProdSense?
We use GitHub as well at Moving Beyond, and I've noticed. I mean, the language on the platform. I mean, forget that the word master brings up images potentially of slavery, but also potentially of really challenging K-12 environments. If you grew up in,
Mm,
for instance, Southeast Asia, right, or
or
if you went
a
to
headmaster, like
um,
headmaster.
a headmaster, right? But
Yeah.
beyond that, I think there's an opportunity to even get clear. Are you committing a piece of code to right, like a development environment, or are you gonna send it to production? I mean, there's just clarity there that the word master does not, it doesn't have. Like, what does that mean? Master of what? So I also think that there's an opportunity just to use language that is
More inclusive.
more inclusive, more specific. Um, let's let's talk a little bit about, where product intersects. I'm going to say like real world. Where does it touch? Like just normal people in their everyday interactions. And one of the examples that you started to talk about was Amazon's applicant tracker, right? Where it your chances of moving through the process is not based on your CV, your cover letter, your merits, but your name. And this is where I think technology can have a pretty big impact on people's lives and we don't even know about it. And I'm curious, like,
Yeah.
where else? What
Oh,
else?
there's so many scary places. A term I'll use, and I'm not the only one who uses this term, but digital redlining is a real
Mm,
thing. AI, everybody now is all excited about hearing about things like ChatGPT and all the AI that is popping above the surface, but it is
yeah.
already so deep below the surface, operating in things like risk analysis. And you go to
Hmm.
get a credit card, you go to try to get a house online. These algorithms, like, are these algorithms dealing equitably or not? And there's a great documentary I'll plug is Coded Bias. Um, and that documentary just really talks about problems across the board. Vision, we've seen a while ago, there was I think it was with Google, there was a service that would like read a license or read a passport, and I think there was a black woman who tried to use it and it could not recognize her. Um, and
Yeah.
so it's so many places, it's actually scary. And it's like you said, it's the places we don't see it, but where it's operating is where it's the most dangerous, because it is making decisions and impacting lives. Like, will you get that business, will you get that loan? I don't want to create conspiracy, but it's real. So it is. I think it is touching people way more than they even realize, and that's why you should watch that documentary, because it will at least change your perspective and help you understand why there is such an urgency to work to make sure safeguards are put in place to prevent this from happening. So I think it's there. Um, I think it's in a lot of the apps that we use. I mean, I don't want to make assumptions. Again, like we build with a lens that is built off our lived experiences. And so we just make a lot of decisions that, even me, that I've made a lot of decisions on products I've been on now, where I now would like, if I rethought it, and if I actually had curiosity to find out, like, maybe some of those things were not great decisions that, for me as a white person and my privilege, I wouldn't even notice it, but somebody else might. Um,
Yeah.
so I think it touches us, in many ways. And I think that the evolution of product, if we really want to be inclusive, one is to have more people from, a larger representation in the people that are building the product, asking more
Hmm.
questions. Like, demographics often is like male, female, salary. We need to look beyond that.
Yeah.
We need to look at a much deeper spectrum to help ensure that we're building products that are going to cater to the broadest and most inclusive audience.
So, one of the things that we've talked a lot about on Data is Love is the importance of data literacy. We may not, right? Like, we don't need to be experts in research, in stats, in any of those things, but we can get really good at data literacy. And because data is collected and analyzed also with a lens that's based off of the lived experiences of the folks that are gathering and analyzing it, asking better questions, asking questions that are relevant, not not doing hokey things like, and my favorite one that I used to teach people about data literacy is pay equity. Like, we just need to stop saying things like, Native women make 50 cents to a dollar, because it erases responsibility, which is,
Mm,
it's like the opportunity. It's not that you make 50 cents to the dollar, it's that the collective earnings of this group are 50% of this other group. Why? Can
right.
we ask that question? So I'm
It's not
curious,
a
like, if,
it's not a it's not a it's not just a fact that like we are divorced from having a part in. It's like, oh, that's so horrible. It's like when the tornado hits, for
yeah.
example, right? We could be like, oh, we don't control the tornado, but this tornado we control. Like
Well, and then we also kind of control tornadoes because, like, they're a product of climate change, which
that is,
we
well,
are. But that's a different.
oh
I
boy.
mean,
You
we'll
just
just be here
you
all
just
day.
dropped okay, bad example. True, bad example.
There is an incredible series on Apple right now called Extrapolations. That's playing out if we right if we stay with where we are with respect to our priorities. Okay, but I want to ask you, is there is there like an analogy to data literacy with product literacy? We're not all builders. A lot of us are consumers, and a lot of us are making choices about what to buy for our companies, for instance. And so, what could product literacy look like?
That's really fascinating. I think so. What I think I'm understanding you're asking is like, hey, if I'm a consumer or if I'm not building the product, but I'm making decisions about products,
Yeah.
what I think you can start to do is assess products and the experience. And is that going to be an experience that is going to cater to the needs of the users? Um, is it is it doing things in an inclusive way? Um, and I think when companies buy products, they often, especially if they're larger companies, are making big investments. I think it's fair game to inquire into how those products are built, especially bigger companies. Like smaller companies, maybe they'll be like, we don't need you. But if you're like a big company that is like Slack, for example, right?
Hmm.
Big companies pay millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars for their subscriptions, right? I worked at Splunk. We had
Yeah.
companies paying seven figures for our product. I think asking like how the product is being built is a reasonable question to add to the purchaser's Q&A, and having some criteria to assess. Like, it's not going to be, every product is different, but there are telltale things to look for to know, is this an inclusive product? So I think you have a lot of say you have a lot of control in your ability in a market that has many different options to at least choose the one that I would say reduces causes the least amount of pain, because I think the reality of it is it may be very difficult to find one that is perfect, but
Hmm.
at least having some sense of like, well, this one is going to be really problematic, and we can go with this one. And I'm using a lot of hand waviness here. There's an opportunity here for somebody to come along hint, hint, and provide guidance on, what does good look like, and what are the kinds of questions that companies and procurement need to think about when they're bringing a product in. And I firmly believe that a lot of these questions today probably aren't even asked.
Yeah, and that's why Teams, for instance, exists. Um, or SharePoint, which is my personal nightmare product, because of how difficult it is to
Well, I'm
use.
I'm I'm interested, actually, if I can ask a question back to
Yeah,
you, as being a woman and a woman of color. Have
yeah.
you, I gave the GitHub example, but have you experienced products where where you clearly felt like this is not a product that was designed for me? And I know you mentioned the
Hmm.
complexity side, but but
Yeah.
where you really felt like it was crossing into, this was clearly built for white men, for example. Have you ever felt that?
Well, so I mean, I don't know what like white men are looking for because that's not an identity I have. Um, Yeah, but I can actually Slack is one of the products where for a long time, and I was an early Slack user, and I loved it because it was so simple and the aesthetics, right? It was also beautiful. It was really simple. It was really beautiful. It didn't require a lot of guesswork. And I've noticed that their product development over time, for instance, one of the things that they've done over the last couple of years is like you can schedule a Slack message
Yeah.
for another time. And that's something for like instance, I mean, I have to use Teams a lot because a lot of our clients are large organizations that are on the Microsoft ecosystem. And so I probably have 7 installations of Teams, one for each of the clients, and it doesn't allow for that. And right, and so as a user, I'm like, what do I do? Do I turn off notifications during certain hours?
Yeah.
And that works on my end. I can make it so I don't have to look at them.
Yeah.
But what if I am, and this is where I think product and like our work lives and all of our lives intersect. For me, it's like something as simple as being able to schedule an email or a Teams message or a Slack message to go out honors the fact that we're not all working at the same time. And forget flexible work, right? Forget all of that. We're also not all working in the same time zone. So a lot of
Right.
technologies I feel like are designed
A
for,
specific time zone.
right? Like it's designed for people that are more or less in and around the office, and they're
Yeah.
designed for everybody working kind of in the same time zone and kind of the same set of hours. And so I don't know that I can think of examples where I've used things and I'm like, ugh, like who was the
Well,
audience for this?
you mentioned Slack. I have something I want to call out. So Slack added skin tone, right? Where you can change, and of course, Apple does this now with their emojis. And so Slack has
Hmm.
where you can set the skin tone so that when you do a like,
Yes.
it's not a white like and it's a different color. And one of the things I have noticed is, since that feature was added, I
Hmm.
consistently notice, particularly Black folks and people of color, use that color emoji.
Yes. Yes.
Now, like a some people might dismiss that and be like, oh,
Hmm.
that's just a topical thing that doesn't really hold any weight, which is easy to say as a white person because you are the default, unfortunately, for,
Yeah.
but now putting aside like even my own experience and seeing how often people of color and Black folks use that skin tone feature tells me that is valuable. That
Yeah.
is something people are deliberately choosing, because you have to turn it on. And so, like, that gesture makes that product more inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so like emojis and reaction icons that are in it. right, like skin tone specific. I also think about products that are not technology products, that
Mhm.
are for sure not designed with any person of color in mind. And because I've just come back from a vacation, sunscreen,
Oh, okay. You're saying
sunscreen,
going beyond technical products.
right? Is I'm like, who thought this was cute? You know, like, do I want to look like a ghost? Like, am I auditioning for this role? No. I want to be on vacation. Like, I want to have the protection, and I don't want to look like a ghost on the beach. That's
Yes.
not that's not a thing, right? And so I think
So
that
a
they're
lot of these
just
skincare products are often, as a great example, are just have been historically designed for white people.
right. And the myth
Hair
that
products, of course, is the other huge one.
huge area. So okay, I know that we're at time. Will you just end with telling us a little bit about ProdSense, because you just started this company, you just won or bagged or gained your very first client. How are you looking to help organizations with this new venture? And that's where we're going to close out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aparna. So it's I'm basically operating as a fractional CPO, Chief Product Officer. So I'm looking to work with companies that are at that stage where they probably have a product person, they're early stage, and they're realizing they need more. And I think in these times, it's also attractive in the sense that, hiring a CPO full time, that, CPOs are expensive. There's equity. There's a whole bunch of things that this just offers the flexibility. So I'm working with companies to help them with their product strategy.
Yeah,
If you look at my background, a lot of my strength is in platform tools and services. So that is really where I'm focusing. AI is quickly becoming a big space that I'm starting to focus on as well. There's a lot of
yeah,
overlap there. And then also trying to bring that equity lens, focusing on those two things that I mentioned, which is looking at, are we building products in a way that is inclusive in terms of the way that we run our product organization? And are we getting, back to your podcast, the data, and looking
yeah,
at building the right set of capabilities and experience to cater to a very broad audience? And the global majority, I would say, in that, the global majority.
yeah. Yeah, and the global majority. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me. We're going to share information about ProdSense in the chat for folks that want to connect with you. And I'm also going to say, follow Glenn, connect with him on LinkedIn. You're super active there. And I've just noticed how responsive you are as well on the platform. And we'll be back again next week for another episode of Data is Love. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you, Aparna. This was a gift.